Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started shortly. Just waiting for some more people to come in. Ray, so can you please make sure that Joe Zisman from the consultant team can unmute? He's currently listed as an attendee.
Yeah, going through that now.
Joe, I just converted you to a panelist, so you should be able to unmute and everything at will now. Is that working for you?
It is, Patrick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're at 21 participants right now. We'll give it one more minute until 1:03, and then we'll get started. Okay, it is now 1:03, so we're going to start this meeting. This is the second meeting of the Martha's Vineyard Beach Road Study Working Group. The study is taking place in Vineyard Haven, Tisbury on Martha's Vineyard. My name is Patrick Snyder, and I'm the MassDOT project manager for this effort. Thank you all for being here today. We are also joined by members of our consultant team. I would like to thank you all for joining us today and thank our working group members in attendance, especially any officials who might be on the call today. Today, we're meeting to discuss this conceptual planning study for Five Corners and Beach Road. This is an important intersection and local area on Martha's Vineyard, and MassDOT is excited to be conducting this study, looking at safety and climate change mitigation measures in the area. We've asked you here today to explain our end of the project on the MassDOT side and collect input from you as local stakeholders on your perception of the area, and this will inform our future work on this study. Today, we're going to be presenting our existing conditions review of the study and move forward into a discussion. Next slide, please. Before we launch into our presentation, I would like to open with a few procedures for today's meeting. First, please note that this is an open virtual public meeting and it is being recorded. Massachusetts Department of Transportation may choose to retain and distribute this video, still images, audio, and/or chat transcript from the recording. So by continuing attendance at this meeting, you are consenting to participate in a recorded event. All recordings and chat transcripts will be considered a public record. If you are not comfortable being recorded, please turn off your camera, keep your microphone muted, and refrain from chatting in the chat or Q&A boxes. Later in the presentation, working group members will have the opportunity to participate and ask questions or share comments during the discussion portion of the agenda. To participate, you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, or if you are participating by phone, you can dial *9. I will then call your name and you can unmute so that you may share your question or comment. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted unless speaking, and ask that all presenters and speakers start by stating their name. This will benefit everyone, especially those who are participating by phone. Working group members on this meeting are here as panelists and will be able to share their video. You can keep your video on or off. Members of the public in attendance may submit questions or comments at any time using the Q&A, and meeting staff will address them as time allows toward the end of the presentation. We will also have a public comment period following our working group member discussion. If you need technical assistance, please contact Zoom technical support at 888-799-9666. That's the number on the slide here. You can also email Raisa Kwame, MassDOT's MPO liaison, at raisa.kwame.a.kwame@dot.state.ma.us. Next slide, please. This is our agenda for the meeting today. We'll start off by reviewing the working group ground rules. We'll have introductions from members of the working group, present the status of our project and site visit observations from the site visit that was conducted by the study team in August. We'll go forward with a safety analysis, discussion of flood vulnerability, and move into a timeline and next steps. Please note, we will not be discussing conceptual design alternatives today. We'll then have a discussion period with members of the working group and close with a public comment period. Next slide, please. So let's move forward with introductions from members of the working group. As I mentioned earlier, we're all here as panelists and hence will be able to unmute yourselves. And I will call out that order. So let's start with Ben Robinson.
Thanks, Patrick. Ben Robinson, he, him, pronouns, Tisbury Planning Board Chair.
Thank you, Ben. Richard.
Rich Bilski, MassDOT, District 5 Project Development Engineer.
Andrea Coates.
Hi, Andrea Coates, District 5 Environmental Engineer.
Barbara LaChance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Barbara LaChance, I'm the District 5 Planner.
Hung Pham.
Hello, how are you? My name is Hong Pham, he, him. I am a Senior Program Manager for Resiliency and Roadway Reconstruction for MassDOT Headquarters.
Jay Grande.
Jay Grandy, Town Administrator.
Mark Higgins.
I'm Mark Higgins, Steamship Authority, Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you. And are there any attendees who are not here as panelists, but are members of the working group and would like to introduce yourselves? I believe Amy Upton, you're here.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Amy Upton, and then we'll have the phone number 703. Amy Upton first.
Yeah, Amy Upton. I'm here, Tisbury Planning Board Administrator.
Thank you. 703, the phone number.
Alex Chicatano here from the office of Dylan Fernandez, filling in for our Vineyard liaison, Kelly Moore, who's out on maternity leave.
Thank you. And Melinda Loberg, I see that you have a raised hand. You should be able to unmute now.
Yes, thank you. I am chair of the Tisbury Climate Committee.
Thank you for being here. So we can move forward. Next slide, please. These are the ground rules for our working group today. Starting off, we request that you listen to the opinions of others and work together to ensure a constructive dialogue and productive discussion. We're here to make forward progress on this project. Again, we appreciate having you here today. After today's meeting, we will have 2 public meetings and a further working group meeting. So in the future, we would appreciate your attendance at these meetings, although it is not strictly required. All these meetings will be recorded, the working group meetings and the upcoming public meetings. Working group members are allowed to show video and can keep their video on or off during the meeting. Meeting staff may mute you or turn off your video if the audio/video becomes distracting. And please keep muted and keep your computer notifications off. Mute yourselves, allow the presenters to speak. Next slide, please. I will now pass it over to our consultant team who's working on this project.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Zisman. I'm the consultant project manager from Cambridge Systematics. As a reminder, we are joined on this team by Tool Design, who will be producing conceptual design alternatives as we go forward and has contributed to the existing conditions we'll be presenting this afternoon. It's wonderful to see this group again and to give an update on what the team has learned about this study area in the past several months. The photos that you'll see throughout the presentation were taken by the team on a site visit we made to Vineyard Haven in early August. They represent the site conditions as we found them that day. Next slide, please. As a reminder, our project began in June. This group last met in July. We've completed our analysis of existing conditions on schedule in September. We are now preparing to begin designing conceptual alternatives for the infrastructure. Next slide, please. The study area for this project includes 5 corners as an intersection and all of the legs that approach it, and some of the surrounding streets and surrounding neighborhood. That includes Lagoon Pond Road to the south of the intersection and the ferry terminal to its north, along with Beach Road to the east as far as the Lagoon Pond Bridge. Next slide, please. Our goal for the project is to develop 3 conceptual plans for the study area with high-level cost estimates. While doing that, we will address current and potential future flooding. We will consider the presence of flows of people, vehicles, and cargo through the study area. We will build on work done since 2015 around safety and multimodal operations at 5 Corners and on its approaches. And through all of that, we'll engage local stakeholders, both through this working group and through public meetings. Next slide, please. As noted earlier, we made a site visit to Vineyard Haven in early August to observe both the physical infrastructure and operational conditions during the height of the tourism season. And we'll go through some observations that we made during that visit that we also backed up with additional research once we got home. Next slide, please. So we'll begin with pedestrian and bicycle conditions. And it's important to note as we begin discussing traffic flows, all of these were measured in 2013. However, we can confirm, certainly with our own observations, the high volume of pedestrians that flow through the study area. It's important to note that the infrastructure is not entirely pedestrian friendly in the study area. Not only did curb ramps not appear to be ADA compliant in some cases, they were not always aligned with crosswalks in addition to that, but we observed large vehicles encroaching on the sidewalk on the northwest corner of 5 Corners on several occasions. We'll come back to that with a map in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. The 2013 count finding of substantial bicycle traffic was confirmed by our site observations. The level of bicycle usage is attested to by the pictures we took at right. There's a bicycle shop and rental facility on one corner of the intersection. The study area is a gap in the off-street bicycle network that runs along Beach Road and Beach Street, which forms a primary thoroughfare together between Tisbury and Oak Bluffs. No bicycle facilities exist at 5 Corners itself. Next slide, please. The traffic volumes that we are presenting here have been projected from 2013 to 2023 during a MassDOT 1% per year growth rate. The following slides will present this information primarily in terms of turning movement shares. So the percentage of vehicles coming into the intersection from each of the entrance points that are continuing straight or making the various turns that are available to them. Because the growth rate was 1% for everything, the percentages of the total flow are the same as they were observed in 2013. Next slide, please. As measured in 2013, approximately 70% of traffic approaching Five Corners on Beach Street and Beach Road continues through the intersection during weekday peaks. We are treating what is shown here as a bare right and bare left movement as the through movement, Beach Street and Beach Road forming essentially one continuous whole. Approximately 20 to 30% make a turn from either Beach Street or Beach Road onto Water Street toward the ferry terminal. So that's a right turn from Beach Road, a left turn from Beach Street. Somewhat more traffic from Water Street made the right turn onto Beach Street than the left turn onto Beach Road. The majority of traffic approaching from Lagoon Pond Road turned right or left rather than continuing straight onto Water Street, with approximately equal percentages making each turn. And the intersection was fairly evenly balanced across 4 of its 5 approaches. Roughly equal volumes entered from Beach Street, Beach Road, and Water Street on weekday peaks. Approximately half as much volume entered from Lagoon Pond Road, and entrance from Beach Street Extension was minimal. Next slide, please. We're now looking at the Saturday peak. So we have 2 slides here. One is for weekdays. That was the last one, all of them. This one is for Saturday alone. The Water Street approach sees somewhat less volume on Saturdays. The other approaches remain essentially constant with the traffic they see on weekdays. The Beach Road and Beach Street approaches perform similarly to each other. Even a greater percentage of volume continues straight, and about 10% less of the volume turns onto Water Street relative to the weekday. Next slide, please. So now we return to the conditions as they exist in 2023, starting with sightlines. We performed a site distance analysis during our site visit in August. We did it for all of the approaches for Five Corners and also for the intersection of Beach Street and Main Street. The procedure for doing that was to stand at the stop line of the intersection and mark the distance to a point that is around the corner at the distance where you lose sight, where you lose visibility of what would be an approaching car. And generally speaking, you do that by having someone stand there and walk backwards until you can't see them anymore. So having done that for all the approaches and all the turns at those 2 intersections, most corners, the sight distances meet minimum standards. The one exception is the sharp right from Lagoon Pond Road onto Beach Road, and you'll see it on the slide there with the yellow arrow. It is blocked by the bike shop. It is worth noting that even though the sight distance analysis was performed relative to what you would see when stopped at the stop line, any observation of the intersection using the overhead camera and also our own observations in person show that many vehicles making a turn actually creep into the intersection beyond the stop line to view and potentially even interact with other traffic before they make the turn. Next slide, please. As noted earlier, during our site visit, we observed many instances where a large, long vehicle, such as a bus or truck, could not make the turn from Beach Street to Water Street or vice versa. And we show the Water Street to Beach Street right-hand turn here. It's also an issue with the left-hand turn that goes the other way. In these cases, those vehicles might encroach on the sidewalk. They also may encroach on opposing lanes of traffic, and we observed vehicles backing up from the intersection to make room for a bus or a truck that needed to turn. Again, this is observable on the overhead camera. Next slide, please. As a final observation from our site visit, the current design of Lagoon Pond Road northbound encourages speed. There are limited and low-profile curb cuts. There is no on-street parking to create friction, and the approach is perfectly straight. Next slide, please. In addition to our site visit, our team has analyzed crash data from the past 5 years, that would be 2018 through 2022, for the study area encompassing Five Corners and several other intersections. Next slide, please. Beginning in downtown Vineyard Haven with Five Corners and the intersections directly next to it, there are 3 clear crash clusters that appear in downtown Vineyard Haven. They are marked 1, 2, and 3 in yellow on the map. The first is the Lagoon Pond entry to and from Beach Street. That is labeled as number 1. The second is the stretch of Water Street northbound entering the ferry terminal. And the third is the intersection of Beach Street and Cromwell Lane. We'll pause here for a moment to explain the map a little bit. Each one of those neon green, orange, or red lines, and we fortunately do not see many orange or red ones here, indicates an incident, a crash. The types of crash are indicated by the way that those arrows interact with each other. And apologies, the nature of this does mean that they're somewhat small, but a legend for them is displayed on the slide and will be consistent over the next 2 slides. Where there is a cluster of thin green lines, yellow, orange lines, or red lines, is pretty self-evidently where a cluster occurs. Next slide, please. Continuing into the southern area of the study area, there is a 4th crash cluster that we've labeled number 4 on the western side of the bend in Beach Road. And it actually exists in both directions, whether you're going into the curve or coming out of the curve. Next slide, please. While not qualifying as a cluster, several crashes also occurred at the western end of the Lagoon Pond Bridge along Beach Road. It is also important to note that the only fatality in the study area between 2018 and 2022 it occurred on this segment of road in a head-on collision during nighttime conditions. Next slide, please. In addition to safety and operations of the roads in the study area, the project is also meant to focus on flood vulnerability and the ways in which infrastructure could be designed to protect access and property. Next slide, please. The study area is located by the coast and has a relatively low elevation. It actually has a very low elevation. Five Corners and stretches of Beach Road, Lagoon Pond Road, Beach Street, and Water Street have an elevation of between 2 and 4 feet. Some segments have elevations of less than 2 feet. Based on sea level rise projections used in the 2022 Massachusetts Climate Change Assessment, the mean sea level of the study area is projected to be 1.2 feet in 2030, 2.4 feet in 2050, and 4.3 feet in 2070. If you pair those off, the low elevation of the study area makes it vulnerable to frequent tidal flooding. Five Corners and a majority of its adjacent roads and properties would be inundated with something like 3+ feet of sea level rise, and that is projected to happen by 2070. In addition to the impact from static sea level inundation, the dynamic of tides, waves, and storm surge are also evaluated using inputs from the simulations in the Massachusetts coast flood risk model. And this, what we're looking at on the right hand of the slide, is a result from the dynamic simulation of a statistically robust set of variable coastal storm surge conditions that produce spatially distributed flood probabilities. And what that means is that the colors on the map indicate the probability of floodwater inundating the land surface at a particular location. Looking at the map of 2030 coastal flood exceedance probability, Five Corners and its adjacent roads and properties lie within the 50 to 100% coastal flood exceedance probability zone. That means it has a 50 to 100% chance in a 1 to 2 year return period of flooding during a coastal storm event. The analysis also looked at the relative depth of water above land during a coastal flooding event with 1% annual flood exceedance probability. The study area is estimated to have 5 to 10 foot flood depth above the ground during a 100-year coastal flooding event in the year 2030. Next slide, please. Another angle of vulnerability is drainage and stormwater management. One challenge for draining this area is that the only outfall for Five Corners is located at the foot of Beach Road Extension, where wave-borne debris can block it. As shown on the map, other outfalls exist but are not connected to Five Corners. There was discussion during the last working group meeting as to whether an alternative outfall location could be found. One challenge is that Five Corners is the low point of the entire area. There is a substantial slope on Beach Street leading to it. There are upward slopes from it along all of its approaches, which limit the ability to direct water from Five Corners to other potential outfalls. And it is important to note that in addition to MassDOT's project, the town of Tisbury is considering various drainage solutions for Veterans Park. Next slide, please. So a note about our next steps. We are currently at number 3 of this 5-step process. Following this meeting, we will begin to develop conceptual design alternatives. We will conduct a public meeting in November, and our final touch points, both with you and with the public, will come in the winter and early next year. And I will hand back to Patrick to begin to facilitate the discussion.
Thank you, Joe. We can move forward to the next slide. We're now going to move into the discussion between members of the working group. As I mentioned previously, after this discussion, we will have a public opportunity so that any members of the public in attendance today may also submit questions, comments. Let's move forward to the next slide. For the discussion between members of the working group, we have some prompt questions here. You are also welcome to have your own questions, comments unrelated to the questions that we have on the screen here. In the interest of organization, each one of you, could you please raise your hands before speaking, and I will call on you. If you're dialing in on the phone today to ask a question, dial *9. I'll call out the digits of your phone number, and then you'll be able to unmute your audio. Do we have any questions, comments from members of the working group? Jay Grande?
Did you look at lighting? Because I've gotten a number of concerns to my office concerning evening people trying to cross there, and it's not adequate lighting. That's it. It's just a comment.
No, thank you very much for that comment. We have not looked at lighting yet, but we will discuss with MassDOT whether it's within our scope to look at later.
Thank you.
And to clarify, just so we're on the same page, that was about streetlights.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Or pedestrian scale lighting, something that would protect particularly the crosswalks.
Okay, thank you. Ben Robinson.
Thanks. You mentioned Lagoon Pond Road being a straight road in that added travel speed issues, but it's a fairly slow moving road. There's a lot of commerce that runs in and out of the post office lot, as well as the thrift store that's just beyond that. So I'm not sure, was that something that you saw on site, or you're just noting that it's a straight approach into the intersection?
Primarily, we're noting that's a straight approach into the intersection.
Okay, all right. So there's nothing that's showing that that's a high-speed roadway in its current operations.
I can't necessarily, I'm not going to say things I can't back up with data, and we didn't do a full speed analysis of the approaches. So for now, I'm just going to say it looks like it could be, but your observation and your lived experience are very much noted.
Right. And then at the last meeting, we talked about potentially being able to reroute some of the drainage before it ends up in Five Corners, particularly the Union Street drainage. Has that been evaluated, or would that be evaluated within the conceptual design phase?
I'll pass that one off to Patrick and Hung.
Hi, Ben. How are you? Yeah, we did take a look at the Union Street, was it, or Main Street?
Yeah, Union Street. Well, it picks up Main Street, but it ends up at Union Street.
Yeah. By looking at the topo there are like a very short segment of the roadway that would drain to it. And the other rest of the segment actually drains towards the ferry terminal. So there is a little topo change. So we didn't look into like if we can, you know, make the drainage a little steeper. That I don't think that it's doable. So I guess I hope that answered your question in terms of like our assessment.
Yeah, basically I was thinking of, you could pick up the drainage lines that are coming down State Road where they make the intersection with Main Street and branch off on Main Street there, redirecting all that upper State Road flow towards the Union Street instead of into Five Corners. It was just a thought that, you know, and I know the elevations are tough there because you're sort of going almost uphill. But if you're doing it underground, you could potentially, you know, pitch the pipes right.
Yeah, we can evaluate that regarding how far we can pitch the pipe. Just want to make sure that I am on the same page as you, because we did look at the Main Street drainage, and it just doesn't seem doable going uphill. But I'll take a look at it again.
And just to clarify here, the MassDOT Highway Division is doing a project separate from this study. That's an ongoing drainage study about addressing stormwater and the drainage pipes in the area. That's separate from this study. It does inform this work, and we're balancing going back and forth between both the study and the drainage project to make sure we're on the same page. So we appreciate your comment about how we might consider that drainage.
So Union Street, just want to clarify, Union Street is 2 blocks north by the Vineyard Haven ferry terminal.
Right.
And so within by Spring Street and Main Street intersection there, you got that little elevation change where Main Street pitched from that intersection of block, Main Street pitched towards Beach Street, and then the rest would go towards the Union Street up north.
Right. That's the intercept. That's where I'm thinking is you could connect, if you could pitch the drainage pipes properly, you could connect State Road to the Union Street, and pick up the flow coming down State Road to at least the Main Street area and redirect it.
Yeah, so this is just me thinking it's like the elevational change between Spring Street and Main Street. There's such a big difference there that as you try to chase that pipe down towards Union Street, you may not be able to capture what catch basins or drainage manhole upstream or actually downstream toward Union Street. But I will definitely look into the drainage database as well as the topo again, just to confirm.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Melinda Loberg.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned that the scope of your study area goes all the way out to the Lagoon Pond Bridge. And I bet you're aware that the town is currently doing a study and as a working group with reinforcing the seawall along Beach Road in that area. And I'm hoping that you are interfacing with them and coordinating with them if this is part of your study area. And a second element there is an outfall pipe in that area that actually goes into the lagoon pond. And the town has requested reorienting that out to the harbor as a better health outcome for the lagoon pond, not dumping road runoff into the lagoon, but rather into the harbor. Those are just two issues that have come up in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Richard Bilski.
I was just curious what you found out at the alternative looking at Lagoon Pond Road and then Water Street cutting out to the steamship bulkhead.
Could I ask for some clarification on what specifically you'd like to know?
The drain line.
I can't actually speak to that, but I can try to hand that to Hung. But otherwise, I would have to say I'll get back to you.
Which are you talking regarding if we can divert towards from Five Corner towards the alpha of
Yeah, because we were originally
ferry terminal?
Yeah, we were looking at the beach road extension, but there's complications because of the dock locations and basically boat traffic in there where our outfall would be. So I know we were looking at possibly Lagoon Pond Road or Water Street to the steamship bulkhead. So where we had access to deeper water for the discharge, and there wasn't a siltation problem as an option. And I was just curious. I don't have any of the topography for the area, but I didn't know how that looked. Upon further analysis.
Yeah, I am unsure whether Cambridge System looked far up on Water Street, but I mean, based on our discussions between District 5, us, as well as GPI, who have been designing the stormwater project, is that the elevational change, that whole area, as mentioned earlier, is so flat that the elevational change could be that challenge for us in diverting from the Five Corner towards Water Street.
No, understood.
Yeah. I can't really rely on elevation to I mean as a base for suggestions, and
Right.
but it's just so but it is the fact at this location where everything is just so flat. I mean, the only way to do that is redoing the whole drainage system on the island, and that is something that is not feasible whatsoever at this point.
I would add to Hong's point on behalf of this consultant team that that was not entirely an existing condition. So I think we definitely took note of that in the last time the working group met. And we'll consider it along when we do conceptual design alternatives of whether the physical space, what the physical space allows for us to build. So I definitely, we'll definitely look at that. That definitely is on our agenda to look at potential alternative outfalls. But as Hung said, the intersection at Five Corners is the low point. So flowing from there to anywhere is going to be somewhat difficult to do. And so I think, thinking in terms of diversions, the higher up the hill you divert, the better off you are. And Five Corners is the lowest point, and therefore probably not where you want to start a diversion.
Okay, no, understood. It'd be interesting to see, though, a correlation with what we end up doing with the intersection, and if we do any elevational changes there for resiliency, and how we could tie that together with the drainage.
It is definitely on our agenda to look into that.
Thank you.
I will also add that the alternatives are going to consider things beyond drainage pipes, like green infrastructure, more permeable pavement and surface treatments. So we're not looking at this in a vacuum of strictly the drainage. It's definitely something that we're taking into consideration, but we're looking at a broader, more holistic view of it when it comes to a variety of stormwater and drainage solutions. Ben Robinson?
Yeah, thanks. Just picking up on that, you need land for those alternative drainage systems. Given that MassDOT nor the town of Tisbury has any property in this area, have you looked at which properties, and I would point out the federal post office property is also in a low-lying area, and there is discussions around should that be relocated to a property that is not so easily flooded. It is also the main distribution point for the rest of the island's postal services. So there may be a need to move that. If you're looking for potentially using space outside of the road layout or town-owned properties, that may be one to think about. Which brings me to my second question is sort of, given sea level rise is a changing target, given different planning horizons, how do you make planning decisions for the next 20 years versus 50 years? Because some of the infrastructure that you put in place may function for a little while and then stop functioning. How do you plan on understanding those different planning horizons?
I will let Patrick start to answer those questions on behalf of MassDOT, and then fill in where I need to.
To your second question, in terms of targets and sea level rise and the different scenarios, that's something we're currently discussing. That's currently a dynamic process. There was feedback at the last working group meeting about what scenarios to use, what models to use. We're still running some models and using outputs from different scenario systems. So that's an ongoing conversation. And in terms of properties outside of the state-owned roadways, Joe can wade into this more, but I would say that would be the next phase of this with the conceptual alternatives. And once we have a better picture of what those might be and the climate resilient standards and scenarios that we're building off of, that would knowing and making note of those impacts would be based on the alternatives that are developed.
Yeah, and to build off of what Patrick said, to some degree, the planning horizon that we use is determined by the intended lifespan of the infrastructure. So there is infrastructure, as I'm sure you know, that is meant to last 25 years, and there's infrastructure that's intended to last 75 years. And so that's part of why I handed it over to MassDOT. It is ultimately MassDOT's choice what our design life for this infrastructure is supposed to be. And that will determine what planning horizon and what climate change horizon, what sea level rise horizon we use. As Patrick referred to, we've done the modeling at a number of different horizons. So we have 2030, we have 2050, we have 2070, and we'll be following MassDOT's lead in terms of which of those we should use. As to the point about extra property, what I can say in terms of the conversations we've had about in general, conceptual design alternatives for Five Corners is that more property would make things easier in a lot of different ways. And the post office property, which faces the intersection with a parking lot and a large brick plaza, is the non-built upon property that fronts the intersection. All the other properties on all the other sides come right up to Five Corners with either the walls of buildings or a bunch of bicycles. So it certainly has entered our heads that for drainage and for a number of other reasons, that property is an attractive one to use as we consider possibilities. However, as a consultant, I can't speak to MassDOT's ability or process for acquiring additional property. So, and as a conceptual project, we will start to get into that a little bit, but I want to be really, really careful when we're talking about any property MassDOT doesn't already own, or the town.
And that would also be something that comes up much further down the line, if and when this moves into a project development process.
I'd like to also add in the fact that what I'm hearing as an underlying question on that is, what changes in terms of roadway elevation can we do around the Five Corner? And the answer to roadway elevation is that that topic is slowly being discussed internally on what time frame are we looking at. And as you may already know, as we increase the roadway elevation, there has to be an increase in the base of the road itself, and that has potential impacts to properties adjacent to the roadway. So I believe that Cambridge Systematic is pointing at just the lifespan of the road, and that's just rightly so. But in terms of future elevational change of the roadway, that's still being discussed.
And to build a little bit on Hung's point before we go back to questions, I think one thing that we also have been discussing, in addition to the time frame, is what are the problems that you can design this road to protect you from, and what are the failure cases? Is it a failure case, for instance, if there is enough water on the roadway that trucks from the ferry cannot serve all of the functions that they serve for Martha's Vineyard, that is an entry point for cargo that serves the entire island's economy. And if trucks can't get through there, if cars can't get through there, is that a failure state? Is it a failure state if ambulances can't access the hospital that's on the other side of the bridge? So what are we building for? And I think that that's central to the question of the design alternatives going forward. And I will hand it back because there's a raised hand.
Yeah, just one final point from Ben Robinson, and then we're just going to move on to another topic.
Yeah, Joe, I just wanted to add electric buses, and that's a transit hub, and we've already had flooding events where the electric buses are not able to service the area because of the type of bus.
That has come up. Thank you, Ben.
And just two questions, because this is the first that I'm hearing of this. Are there charging stations in the area for those buses?
There was discussion around putting a charging station in, but given the low elevations and the groundwater, you would have to do an overhead charging station, and that was contemplated.
Is that still being discussed?
It's not a primary discussion, but because the VTA, it is a hub, they would like to be able to add some sort of charging, but given its location, it doesn't seem feasible.
Okay, thank you. We will shortly move into the public comment period, but again, in the interest of just making sure we have a complete picture of everything, do any members of the working group have input on our sort of complete streets angle of this, with hopefully introducing and thinking about multimodal facilities, improving pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure? Jay Grande did have an earlier comment about the streetlights. Melinda?
Yes, you mentioned that you noted a lot of bicycle traffic in Five Corners. And during the Beach Road project that was recently completed, there were alternatives to having bikes in Five Corners considered, and there are plans reflecting that. And I just wonder if you are looking at bicycle traffic and the gap in the bicycle system for the island, whether this will be a part of your design ideas.
It is, yes. So next slide, please. We're going to move into the public comment period. As this is an open posted meeting, members of the public do have the opportunity to comment today. If you have a question or a comment, you can raise your hand and we will call on you and give you access to unmute your microphone. You can also put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will answer them from there. If you're calling in on the phone, dial *9 and we'll call out your phone number and you will be able to unmute. Okay, seeing nothing in the Q&A or any hands raised, we will move forward and conclude this meeting. Thank you all for your questions and comments. Thank you to the members of the working group. And again, thank you any members of the public for being here today. We appreciate all of your attendance at this meeting. In the next month or two, we'll be reaching out with an invitation for our upcoming public meeting, which will be dedicated to members of the public and stakeholders outside of the working group would like to have some input. Contact information is at the bottom of this box, planning@dot.state.ma.us. Please feel free to email with any questions, comments, or further concerns. And we will now conclude this meeting. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.